welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, my guest this week first had on last year. James Esses is the co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists. He's now, getting to be a fully fledged commentator and writer. Thank you very much for joining us again, James.
No problem.
When we spoke last, you had just been, sort of expelled from doing your master's degree, and that was because of your views about the medicalisation of children, via gender theory, wasn't it?
That's right.
Gender ideology. Since then, you've been doing lots of broadcasting, and I wondered if we could start by something which you were very involved in last week, because we talked about it a lot here, and that was this Costa Coffee case. I mean, it comes under the umbrella of increasing what people call woke capitalism, I suppose. But how did that actually first arise for you, this particular case?
I was simply sent a photograph of that, and it turns out that this mural, as they're calling it, and this cartoon image of this woman with double mastectomy scars, that this was from some Pride event in Brighton.
Yeah. I
think last year, actually. It's only just cropped up now.
Really?
Someone sent a photograph to me out of the blue, and I thought this was worth publicising. And yes. It took off pretty rapidly. I mean, all of the mainstream media were talking about it for a couple of days. I mean, Costa Coffee themselves have gone completely stum. I mean, they
Yes.
don't seem to have properly commented on this yet. But it just shows the strength of feeling that exists out there.
Yeah.
I mean, just being confronted with that type of imagery and knowing that your son or daughter might walk past that,
Yes.
and what that might do in terms of their thinking, it's really quite troubling.
It's incredibly important, is it? That was done via Twitter, presumably social media.
Yeah.
How one can bring these things to a wider attention. I think we actually got a picture of it coming up here on the screen. It is. It was just a kind of cartoon, like a jolly cartoon character, wasn't it? Really, but with these scars and here.
And blue hair.
And blue hair, yes. Dead giveaway, yeah.
But shameless promotion of their brand. This because in the cartoon images you can see that they're kind of necking back a nice Costa Coffee.
Yes.
So they're trying to capitalise on virtue signalling, but I would also say on this particular issue they're trying to capitalise on people's kind of mental pain and suffering.
Yes.
Because of gender dysphoria, which is leading to these double mastectomies being performed as a mental health condition. So. Costa deeming it appropriate to try and profit from that, I think, is really quite worrying.
Yes. Yeah, there was another case recently, Monzo, the bank Monzo. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so, this kind of emerged off the back of the Nigel Farage and Coutts affair, but in essence, a number of staff there have kind of leaked screenshots of internal communication channels within the bank. There's an online bank, it's quite a big bank actually, in the UK. And in it, members of staff are there gossiping about prospective customers, insulting their views, using terms like TERF, which is a kind of derogatory term meant to mean trans.
Trans, exclusionary, radical feminists.
Correct. So one kind of prospective customer who spoke to them on LinkedIn, he was described as a horrible TERF. The LGB Alliance, the charity representing LGB people, was described as a hate group. And some of this speech was taking place by very senior HR directors. And I chose not to name any of these individuals because I didn't want to cause a pylon. But it demonstrates something about the culture that's going on in these organisations. And, what must other members of staff have felt, those who believe, for example, in biological reality, if they see that their views and opinions are just being insulted on their internal communication channels, including by senior leaders in the organisation, that's going to prevent them from feeling at all like they can speak out on their own behalf. And again, what does it say about the kind of potential customers of Monzo when they view swathes of society with such disregard?
Can you tell us as well, this is a while ago, there was a case involving Wix, wasn't there, the store Wix. What was that about?
Yeah, so I tend to get past this information by kind of, people on the inside, again, showing that people don't feel able to speak.
This does come from people in the companies, does it?
Yes, quite often.
Yeah.
The Wix affair there was a training being run by Pink News, that quasi-journalistic outfit. And it was a kind of an inclusivity training about LGBT. It was being run for a number of employers, has been sponsored by Ernst Young. And the chief operating officer of Wix was speaking on a panel there with a number of trans individuals. And Wix had been pushing this trans narrative for a while. They had had a float at Trans Pride. And he was describing how he came in for some criticism from a lot of customers who said basically that, they didn't want to shop in a store that didn't kind of acknowledge biological reality, that felt that men could become women and vice versa. And the COO, his name's Fraser Longdon, he basically said, people who don't agree with Wix's position on this are bigots, and, as far as I'm concerned, they're not welcome in our stores anymore.
That's surely, I remember that now, and I remember thinking it was a bit like a Gerard Ratner moment, wasn't it?
Yes, that's how people described it. It's just crazy, actually. And given particularly that on this topic, we know that the majority of the population do not believe that men can become women and vice versa, to have that level of kind of disdain towards prospective customers. And so there was a boycott called. Their share price fell instantly. And people are still boycotting Wix, as far as I'm aware. Similarly, people are boycotting Costa Coffee now.
Yes, what is the state of play with Costa now then? Is there a petition, or is it just pure I've always argued that people should boycott if they realise they have the power to do it. People don't, what difference is just one person going to make? Well, actually, we've seen in America that it can make an enormous difference, can't it?
Well, completely, because all these companies care about is the bottom line, and so that is the only way it seems to kind of get through to them. But particularly, this isn't just, I'm not going to shop somewhere because I don't agree with the owners of that company's views. Some of these owners, as I said, this COO of bloody Wix is saying to most of the population, you're not even welcome in our stores anyway. So, who deserves to be treated like that by a service or a product provider, that you're paying good money to be treated like that? So people have to vote with their feet in this regard. But Costa Coffee themselves have kind of gone under the radar now. They put out some lily-livered statement basically saying that they supported, that it was about promoting inclusivity. They said something particularly interesting, which was that, they want to support people to feel comfortable in their own skin. But here they're highlighting people who've had irreversible surgery to fundamentally change who they are. Those two things don't add up.
Exactly. Do you think, when you hear something like the head of Wix, for example, which to me seems a more egregious one actually than Costa, because he's more or less saying, you're total bigots, as you say, if you don't go along with this. Do you think that they actually really believe gender theory or ideology, or do you think it's purely cynical?
I find it so confusing. I try and get a read on people when they're saying these things, and it's very difficult. I think for some they are simply chasing the dollar signs, because this is the trendy thing to be woke, as it were, to be inclusive, to have that kind of tick box, to have Stonewall's accreditation or whatever,
Even now? Even after all that we know?
There are many organisations out there proudly flying Stonewall's flag and celebrating that they're in their top, whatever it is, 100, gold list employers. Even after all of the smearing that Stonewall's come in for, because anyone worth their salt doesn't trust the advice that Stonewall are giving out. But a lot of companies still view that with pride. I think some of these individuals are genuinely bought into this, because we've had it kind of rammed down our throats for a number of years. It's only relatively recently that people are starting to push back against this, but it's, it's everywhere. And the message is, if you don't go along with it, you're a bad person. I think some people just, they just want an easy life, really. They don't want to kind of upset the apple cart. They know that there's a small but very loud, vocal minority who are going to try and shut you down, if you dare to say anything along the lines of biological reality. So they just keep stum.
Yes. There was a poll recently, last week in fact, done, which showed, but it was done in Britain, it showed that about a third of people weren't even aware of what the actual this terminology is used. So being a trans woman, basically they did not know this meant that these people were biological men. There's a third of people, I don't know if you saw that, did you? Yeah. I mean, were you surprised by that?
Not really, because again, the kind of the narrative, particularly in education these days, even from some of our political leaders, is that men can become women. You know, you've got Keir Starmer saying 1 in 1,000 women have a penis. I mean, this is going to kind of filter down.
Yes.
It's become confused. I mean, you know, sex is a pretty straightforward concept in that it's binary and immutable, but now the waters have been completely muddied and nobody knows what's going on. And I see this myself. I mean, I posted something recently about NHS guidance describing to trans men and trans women, you know, when they should or shouldn't come for certain types of screening, because what we're hearing is that there are biological males showing up for cervical screening because they're trans women, and so they have convinced themselves that they have a cervix.
Yeah.
And equally, there are biological females who have become trans men who are getting missed for cervical screenings because they put down their sex as male, and so they're not even getting the notification that the screening's required. So this is actually like impacting our health service as well.
Yes, but it is you know, to actually present, you know, and say, you know, I need a cervix examination when you are a biological male. That is pure mental illness, surely.
It's either mental illness or it's that we're not actually doing our duty in terms of educating people, and that children and even those in university are being taught ideology rather than the facts. I mean, I could easily foresee a scenario in which children are kind of leaving school not knowing fundamental parts of their body because they're being taught you can be and identify as anything you want.
This is actually, it's this part of it, isn't it? The effect it has on children, which is one of your main concerns, isn't it? I mean, what brought that about in the first place, actually, James? You know, when did you become passionate about this issue?
When I was counselling at Childline, and I was noticing much of my conversations with these young people was moving away from bullying, you know, issues at home, you know, other very serious issues, but moving more and more towards, I think I'm trapped in the wrong body. You know, these are my pronouns. You know, I want to wear a breast binder. I want to take puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. And so I saw a real increase in the numbers of children presenting in this way, and that's what drew this to my attention in the first place. Because if you're not in these bubbles, you don't tend to know. I mean, I don't have children. So I wasn't aware of what's being taught in schools. I mean, now I really am aware because I've had teachers and parents share these materials with me. But if you're outside of the loop, I think you could be convinced that all is well, and that there's nothing sinister going on here.
But I remember we did a program, a heritage documentary with Calvin Robinson, and we were talking about the kind of often third-party materials that schools use and everything, and parents just can't get hold of them, or rather they put spurious reasons up as to why parents can't see them. I mean, how would we most effectively tackle this issue in schools with gender theory, ideology, being taught to children? I mean, you know, I think I might have said to you last time that, you know, for example, my own niece, you know, she's got kids at school, and one came home recently and said, oh, we had trans role play. Now, whatever that is, I do not know. But I mean, the fact is, she sort of almost found out by accident. I mean, you know, she now asks the kids exactly what they're taught. But how do parents sort of fight back? What advice could you give them to fight back?
Well, they need to be given a bit of a step up, and I'm hoping that's going to come in the form of the government's guidance, which we're still waiting for on what's being taught in schools.
What's the position with that exactly, government guidance?
It's been delayed. I mean, we're still, there's been some supposed leaks of what it might contain, but generally we don't know what the content of it's going to be. I mean, the government said they were going to, you know, fall short of wanting to legislate in this space. They felt that guidance was enough, but I'm not convinced that guidance is enough, actually. You know, schools should be legally prohibited from teaching things that are not based in reality and fact.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? Because, I mean, what is the strength of, you know, what is the effectiveness of guidance anyway in schools? What is the standing of it?
Well, precisely this, and, you know, a school's not going to be shut down over it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than nothing, and it would be something that I hope parents will be able to add to their armoury, but it's not really enough. And I don't know how much of it is going to talk about content as well. I mean, so much of it seems to be focused on another important issue, which is about schools basically allowing pupils to transition behind their parents' backs, and use of same-sex facilities and all the rest of it. So the problem is there's just so much here that's going on. But I hear from parents all the time who don't know what to do. And one parent recently I spoke to, they reached out to the school. They said, "I'm not happy with what's being taught. I want you to provide me with the materials." Even said, "I don't really want my daughter being taught this stuff. I kind of want to pull her out of this class altogether." And she was basically told by the principal, "Well, if you don't like it, you can lump it and take your daughter elsewhere."
Yeah, exactly. No, I could see. We had a case recently, didn't we? It was sort of born out of gender ideology with the girls who recorded their teacher. I mean, which I have to applaud them. I mean, well done for them. It was about the kid who was identifying as a cat or something, but it could have been anything else. It was obviously came out of this ideology. And but one wonders, when listening to that teacher, I mean, she sounded like an absolute political activist to me.
Oh, completely. And the teacher themselves would probably put themselves as activist first, teacher second. And actually these things they would view are intertwined, that they're here to teach the next generation how to be, good, upstanding citizens. But the problem is this is very subjective. And so they think that they're doing, in some ways it's almost with a religious fervour. They're kind of doing God's work in terms of educating their students about these things. But yes, the way that teacher spoke to those kids in the recording, hurling insults at them, basically shouting them down. I mean, the entire purpose of education is to encourage things like critical thinking, open conversation and debate, and that's just being shut down here by, as you say, activist teachers.
It's true. You are developing, you're not, basically a set of, suggestions of what should happen, aren't you? I mean, you're working on that at the moment, aren't you?
I am, because I think something's got to give. I mean, I posted on Twitter recently, I thought I'd do something interesting. I go through all the political parties that have representation in Westminster, and I would see what their leaders have said on the topic of gender ideology. And basically, almost every party, bar the Conservatives, is led by someone who's pushing this ideology, who believe that women can have a penis, who believe that,
Davey said it, didn't he? Definitely said there certainly clearly are women with penises.
Yes, Davies pushing it. Starmer's flip-flopping, but it's clear that he does believe it, and I wouldn't trust him on anything he says necessarily. The Greens are captured. A number of the parties in Northern Ireland are, and particularly we've seen in the devolved governments. I mean, the SNP have been pushing this hard, as we know. I mean, that caused Sturgeon's downfall. Similarly in Wales, they're pushing it. So I feel there needs to be some sort of wake-up call to these politicians, because there's this, huge strength of feeling in the country, and these politicians need to know that if they don't start standing up for child welfare, women's rights, free speech in this regard, that it's going to cost them votes in the next election. So I'm trying to pull together a kind of declaration that we can get some signatures on, and just send a message to Westminster politicians that they have to listen to what's going on in the country.
Well, now is the time to do something like that with an election coming up. Definitely it is. I know this is a really big sort of question in a way, but why is this happening, do you think? Why is it happening? Why, basically, if we'd been sitting here 5 years ago, well, we were sitting here 5 years ago, I was anyway, trans, it was sort of slightly there, but just sort of very much on the periphery, not really an issue. Here we are now, it's one of the number one issues. And why? What is behind it, do you think?
Well,
why is it being pushed by companies, by public institutions, by schools?
Well, it's interesting to look at how this kind of came about. I mean, I did some research into this recently. Up until 2014, 2015, Stonewall, which is a household name, and had done so much work in terms of supporting the gay community, that they considered themselves to be an LGB charity. That was it. There was no T, and you'd be kind of hard pressed back in 2014 to hear the term LGBT even used, and now it rolls off the tongue as easy as anything else. I mean, it's such a commonly used acronym now. But they took a decision, I believe, from having researched into it, because they felt that, and others felt that their job was basically done. They
When it came to gay rights and everything, yes. Yeah.
So they were kind of ceasing to serve a purpose. In came a new chief executive officer, wanted to kind of cement her place clearly in history, and so they made this decision to become the inclusive of the T, is what they called it. And so overnight, LGB went to LGBT, and Stonewall had so much influence, so many connections with the government and all the rest of it, that it's kind of filtered outwards from there, really. But it was done very kind of slowly but surely over a long period of time, almost without anyone really realizing it. It's like that boiling frog, analogy.
Yeah.
So they've kind of just ramped up the temperature slowly but surely to the point that now we've all woken up to it, and actually, in many ways, it's too late because the damage has already been done.
I mean, I watched a quite brilliant lecture recently by James Lindsay, in America, and I tend to sympathise with his view. He sees woke generally, or what's called woke, as basically a form of Marxism. Essentially, it is a development from Marxism, and that therefore things such as gender ideology are just a very, very good way in, maybe, just like critical race theory might be. But these are all basically offshoots of a kind of form of cultural Marxism, which is a perfectly reasonable expression to use, although they're trying to demonize it now by saying it's anti-Semitic and all of that. It really is not. At least I never knew it was. But essentially, that it is a form of Marxist attack in all institutions, and these are just simply elements of that attack. Does that sound to you plausible?
I think it's certainly plausible. Whether people have that at the forefront of their mind when they're kind of carrying out ritualistically,
No, because they don't have to have it at the front of their minds. They might not even know what we're talking about at the moment. It's just that it's a way in. All of this comes from the abolition of truth, in a way, from postmodernism and Marxist thought, And
look, I don't even know whether it's necessarily been done in a kind of intentionally vindictive manner. I mean, I think a lot of people are reaching out for something to speak to them in this day and age. There's clearly a gap by the kind of fall of religion in many parts of the Western world.
That's the other point I was going to ask. That essentially this idea, I think Tim Stanley spoke about this in the Telegraph. There's this idea that somehow, when people stop believing in God, they'll believe not in nothing, but in anything.
Yes, and I think it's symptomatic as well of. I've been saying this a bit recently, and I do hate using this term, but the privilege that we've got in the West, because we have the free time on our hands, we've got the kind of secure foundations for us to spend all this time navel gazing, thinking about what our inner identities are, almost to the point of kind of narcissistic thinking. Which says a lot about the type of society we're living in. Whereas if you go to a third world country that's poverty-stricken or war-torn, they're not having debates over pronouns.
No.
They've got more important things to be thinking about. So in some ways, I think it's symptomatic of our kind of success in the Western world in many ways. And I think it's very sad in that respect. I think children in particular have kind of lost a lot of meaning. What have they got these days? They've kind of got their devices. I think they're becoming more and more antisocial, more and more cut off from others in many ways. We saw that COVID lockdowns, etc., the damage that's done in terms of kind of causing anxieties and young people kind of going out and mixing with others. So they're turning to these kind of online communities, looking for validation, looking for meaning. It's not really surprising when you think about it.
So there is an element of social contagion about, or just simple, fashion. I mean, that might be part of it with kids. When you look at this kind of obsession with androgyny, or the obsession with changing, it does, bring to mind, I know it's an old example, but the Roman Empire, where androgyny and sexual confusion became very much a part of the decline. And when you look at statues from the kind of classical, the zenith of the classical world, these amazing, David and all these amazing statues. And then as it declines, they become, more feminine, they become, less defined, they become more androgynous. And I was just wondering whether this, again, is part of a kind of Western decline narrative.
Well, I think we're certainly losing the notion of, what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman.
Yes.
And I think, women do have a tough time in society. There's no doubt about that. Young girls, in particular, the ways in which their bodies are changing, a lot of the kind of unwanted attention that they get, etc. It's no surprise that, a young girl might not want to be a girl, actually. Equally, men are getting a hell of a tough time of it out there, I think men are often being lumped into boxes as basically kind of being, passé, to be a straight white man is considered an insult in this day and age. I think a lot of men feel as if they're being accused of being a kind of, pervert or a perpetrator of violence without having done anything at all.
Yeah.
So I think you can also see why, a young boy might not particularly want to wear that label either.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there is this kind of desire to kind of be something else, be something more neutral in which you kind of can't come in for attack in one form or another. I mean, I brought this book with me, which I have the shame of owning. It's called the Book of Non-Binary Joy.
Oh, as in like the joy of sex or whatever, or?
The joy of identifying as non-binary, which again is this kind of term that's taken off because, more and more younger people now, they're not identifying as trans male or trans female, they're identifying as non-binary, which could basically be anything.
Well, exactly. It's not even bisexual, what we used to call bisexual, is it?
No, it's not. It's basically that they feel that they're somewhere on a spectrum between male on one side and female on the other.
And this book is just what, like just a commercial book? It's not an academic book or what?
No, it's a commercial book by Ben Pesci, who's a non-binary writer, presenter and fashion icon, self-acclaimed fashion icon. Right. It says on the back, "Hello, darling. Welcome to the Book of Non-Binary Joy. Take my hand and let's start your journey of self-love today." So it's kind of caught up in this kind of self-healing type stuff. But some of the things in it are really quite concerning.
Give us an idea.
And this stuff's been marketed to kind of young children. I mean, firstly, it flies in the face of trying to understand concepts as humans. So Ben says, I was about to say he there, but he would tell me that I shouldn't be using the term he because he's non-binary. But Ben says to try and define non-binary is like trying to catch smoke with one's bare hands, impossible. So the message is, don't even attempt to try and define what this means. He goes on to say, in trying to understand us, you have erased us. So there's this kind of hypocritical idea and this kind of double standard that, you should understand us and where we're coming from and what we're going through, but you can never understand us because you don't have our lived experience.
But I mean, this is total bullshit, but also isn't it sort of just complete narcissism, isn't it? I mean, it's people trying to make themselves interesting, isn't it?
Oh, completely. And look, there's a healthy dose of what I call sass in it. I mean, Ben says, if you're cisgender and offended by anything I've written, email someone who has time to waste. So that's basically a kind of FU to anyone who takes issue.
Yes, and aggressive too, yes.
And then mentioning kind of narcissism, Ben says to his non-binary readers that it's time you put your needs above others. We owe it to ourselves to be selfish. Is that really the kind of morality that you want to instill in young people? He says, you deserve your pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You've worked harder than many CEOs. For what? For saying they're non-binary.
Yes, it's extraordinary. And that basically just, is written, so presumably more for young people than not, really, isn't it? I mean, if you're talking about people on their journey and all of this.
Oh, definitely. Well, you can see the way it's marketed, and I mean, it's full of little kind of diagrams and cartoons and all the rest of it. But again, on what basis is this individual writing this book? I mean, he makes a point at the beginning of the book, almost proudly saying, I failed biology A level. My knowledge of human biology is shaky at best.
Well, that's certainly true.
I mean, it's really quite concerning. Anyway, so this is on my bookshelf, to people's surprise.
I mean, yes, I know it is. It is extraordinary, but there is obviously, that is kind of depressing that kind of thing gets published. Actually, but anyway, there's a far more serious side to all of this, isn't there? In the sense that it's the sheer permanence of the change that people go through when they go through this kind of surgery. And increasingly you see, like on Twitter, which you're all very active on, I know, so am I, and social media, these pictures of girls, for example, you know, proudly showing off their mastectomies and everything. I mean, it requires you to actually just forget about your normal, what you would consider a normal outlook. Not any scars, one wouldn't want to show them off, you know what I mean? It's this kind of pride element. And these terrible mutilations. There's somebody, in fact, that you talked about a fair amount on your social media, which is someone you call the Butcher of Louth. Is that right?
Louth, yeah,
Louth.
That's a place in Ireland. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Right. Can you tell us about who this is?
Her name's Dr. Sive Gallagher. She's a surgeon, plastic surgeon, trained in Ireland and now practicing out of Miami in the States. And she specialises in performing what she calls gender-affirming surgery. So, to put it bluntly, she's cutting off women's breasts, she's cutting off men's penises and testicles, she's giving women prosthetic penises.
Yeah.
She kind of does the whole lot, really, for a hefty sum. Don't think her procedures come cheaper than $10,000. And the way it's been marketed and pushed on social media, again, to young people, it's like very glitz and glamour. I mean, she'll kind of have videos on TikTok and Instagram showing kind of before and after of surgery, with the kind of Miami background and kind of funky music going on, all the rest of it, really trying to appeal again to a certain type of audience, making it seem almost cool to kind of go and do this, posing with her patients post-op, you know, with the double mastectomy scars, all smiles. Everything she seems to do kind of flies completely in the face of safeguarding. I mean, she makes a point of saying that she's also inclusive of people who are obese, because generally surgery is not advised for people who are clinically obese, because there's, you know, significant risks to their life if they undergo surgery and go into general anaesthetic. Well, she says actually, in an aim to be inclusive of obese people, she's happy to provide surgery to people who other doctors would deem too dangerous to do it. So she's offering, I mean, it sounds like a kind of a weird catalogue. It's almost like a pick and mix of surgeries. She offers, for example, for more non-binary bodies, she says, well, if you don't want nipples when I remove your breasts, you don't have to have nipples, or I can put the nipples in a different place to where they normally go. It's basically, I will create for you whatever body you want that matches up to your self-identity.
Yeah. I mean, this is truly, well, it's disgusting, isn't it? I mean, what she's doing. Are there no complaints about her? I mean, how can this be just allowed to pass? I mean, if you say something like, you know, that, oh, well, I might, you know, I'll operate on you even if you're obese. I mean, that surely is going against some medical rules, isn't it?
Definitely. And again, with kind of almost pride, she said that she's performed double mastectomies on girls as young as 13, which is, you know, particularly abhorrent. But she seems to be able to kind of get away with this. I know there is a complaint over in the States against her, but nothing seems to have come of it. You know, thankfully, that type of practice isn't taking place in the UK. But in some ways, it's only a matter of time. I mean, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, who the NHS and other private clinics in the UK have often followed their guidance, they suggested last year removing any minimum age for surgery, which means that you could, under their guidance, have girls as young as 12, 13 having their breasts removed. So it could very well be a slippery slope, but it's, you know, and this isn't just plastic surgery. This isn't just, you know, and actually from a therapeutic perspective, I think we need to instill more confidence in people in many ways to kind of accept the body that they've been given and to try and, you know, become comfortable in who they are. But this is different to just, you know, I don't like the shape of my nose, so I'm going to change the shape of it. This is removing entire parts of someone's body. I mean, completely removing their genitals, for example, or double mastectomies. You know, think about the women out there who've had their breast forcibly removed because they've had breast cancer. They had no choice. They would have lost their lives if they didn't go under the knife. But now these young women are basically saying, don't fancy my breasts, don't like them, they don't feel a part of me, so I just want them chopped off. It's such disregard for the kind of human body.
But the sheer, as you say, inconsistency in approach. I mean, the trauma of having a mastectomy is always absolutely accepted, and in fact, you have, counselling and treatment because for what it would mean, and it's a huge thing. Suddenly, it becomes a sort of celebration. So that's, there's no need for any of that. It's just quite extraordinary, the kind of turnaround. Where do you see this going, James? I mean, I keep asking you sort of, to speculate, but where, I hate using terms like tipping points and things like that, but particularly when it comes to trans, the amount of times we've sort of like gone along this road and say, oh, well, this will finally be, oh, well, this will be, make people realise, this will finally change. And it doesn't seem to. And I just wonder whether it's just down to people not knowing enough still about the issues involved.
It's also so difficult to wind back the clock when this has kind of infiltrated all areas of our society. So I think it's difficult now to kind of have a simplistic fix to it. And I think we are having to deal with things in silos. In the world of sport, we're seeing progress. Yes. More and more sporting bodies are kind of saying, no, if you're a man, you can only compete against other men. But not all sporting bodies are doing that. Education, we're waiting for this guidance to come out. The NHS, well, they said recently, which was quite favourable, that they're planning on banning puberty blockers outside of the context of clinical trials. But again, many, including myself, don't think that goes far enough. The Conservative Party seem to be trying to kind of get a handle on this. Rishi's come out and said some favourable things, but then at the same time, they're still planning on banning conversion therapy, which I think will risk criminalising, ethical therapists who are trying to treat these issues. There's so much good and bad going on at the same time. I could just have to hope that things continue to go in the right direction. I am very worried about the next general election because if any party except the Conservatives get in, or that has a chance of getting in, I really do fear for what's going to happen. I think we could go all the way backwards again. Starmer said he's not going to introduce self-ID, but there's many in his cabinet who would very much like to do so, and they wield a lot of power. So I am worried about what's coming down the tracks, and I'm worried about what happens when the children of today, the ones who've been force-fed this ideology at school and university, when they become the leaders of tomorrow. Yeah. Are we going to just regress all the way back again and lose the progress we've made? Well,
that is actually the whole problem, isn't it? Because people generally, they get a little bit more conservative over time, right, in their views. This is not happening anymore. They're staying kind of left.
Yeah.
And so basically each generation after that will be, obviously being brought up in that situation. Where does this leave you personally, actually? And so you are co-founder of Thoughtful Therapists. I know that therapy as an industry, if you want to call it that, has been hugely affected by such things as gender ideology, hasn't it, and critical race theory, to the point where it's undermining the whole thing. I mean, do you practice in any way?
I can't really at the moment. I mean, I was effectively, excommunicated.
Yes, of course, yes.
So I'm still waiting for my own litigation to come. I'm suing one of the main therapy regulatory bodies in the UK and my former place of study on the grounds of discrimination, and I need to wait and see what happens at the end of that. I would like to be able to practice at some point, but it's by no means a guarantee, because the powers that be in the therapy world sending out a very clear message that if you don't get on board with our ideology, you're basically not welcome here. So I'm very fearful for this profession. I'm very fearful in particular for the clients that are being served by this profession. I think we're doing huge damage to people's mental well-being by a profession that's meant to be helping people's mental well-being.
Well, it's almost like taking away a safety net as well from people. If you know that you're going to get a political kind of ideology coming through at you rather than confidential help with what your problem, your problems, I think it's a huge worry, as you say. Anyway, great for the work you do in highlighting all of this, James, and carry on doing that, won't you, please? And we might see something coming up between now and the general election, some possible course of action that you suggest or whatever.
Definitely watch this space, and yes, I'm not going anywhere. They won't get me to shut up.
Right.
So.
Well, thanks very much indeed for
Pleasure.
that, James.
Thanks.
James Esses there. We shall see you next week, so see you then. Bye. Hello, if you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.